Welcome to The Verdict. Kent Meyers and Mick Cornett joining you once again on a show on Sunday morning. We are very pleased that you would be with us again. We've got a very interesting guest, Marshall Snipes, who has done wondrous things in the community, and he's not a self-promoter. He's just a good doer. And we want to tell you a little bit about the wonderful things he's done in this community, because I think what he's done adds so much to our life, and it's better because of him being in it. Mick, how are you?
I'm good. Yeah, Marshall Snipes is a longtime friend, and you know, healthcare has many layers to it. There's the insurance side, the accounting side, the hospital administration side, the patient side. There's the government side, and I don't know of anyone who can better cover all of those aspects than Marshall Snipes. And has there ever been a 12-month period where we've been talking and thinking about health more than right now? So, I mean, I think he's a guest for the times, and I'm looking forward to this show.
Yeah, one thing I want to point out, we entitled the show Healthcare et al., meaning and other things. And he not only has been a leader in the healthcare industry here in Oklahoma, but he has been a leader in the past and currently in many other areas. We're going to touch on all of those today to show you what significant contributions Marshall has made to this community. So I will just emphasize again, you're watching The Verdict with Mick Cornett and Kent Meyers, and we'll be right back.
Right now, 6 feet can feel like a long ways away. But from 6 feet, we can still smile at each other. From our doorways and our stairways, from opposite sides of the street and opposite sides of the country. Through fear and frustrations, we can remind each other that we are still here for each other. Because we can still smile at each other. And we're not going anywhere.
Law enforcement runs in my family. My father and I combined have served as citizens of Oklahoma for half a century, and I'm proud to carry on the tradition. I'm Lieutenant Dwight Durant with the Oklahoma Highway Patrol, and I am Chickasaw. We all get into law enforcement for various reasons, but the main reason is because we have this need to help other people. The misperception is that we're out here stopping speeders and writing speeding tickets. That's a small portion of what we actually do in an 8-hour day. Putting on the uniform, going through the very intensive patrol school, succeeding through that and graduating, the pride that I had was more than I could ever imagine. The Oklahoma Highway Patrol is one of the finest institutions that we have, and I am honored to be a member of the Highway Patrol. I'm honored to be a citizen of the state of Oklahoma, and just as honored to be a citizen of the Chickasaw tribe.
See more stories about the Chickasaw people at profilesofanation.com.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Kent Meyers and Mick Cornett visiting with you this Sunday morning, and we're bringing you Marshall Snipes as our guest. Marshall is a longtime Oklahoman. He did his undergraduate work and his master's work at Oklahoma State University in accounting. He is a CPA. He spent 17 years in the public accounting business, starting out with Pete Marwick. And then he turned his efforts to what is called private equity interest. He has developed an interest in healthcare by virtue of his work with Integris. He is on the board of Integris. He is a past chairman of the board of Integris, and has still to this day has a very close relationship on the board. He has been on the board of TSET, which is just celebrating its 20th anniversary this month. He's been involved in the past in the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. He's an author of 2 books. He is now authoring a blog called Black Jet Theory, which we're going to talk about a little bit. He is a lifelong Republican and has been very active in the Republican Party, holding many offices, and been involved in the advancement of the Republican Party here in Oklahoma. We'll get him to talk a little bit about that. So, Marshall, so glad you would join us. It's good to see you, and our guests are waiting to hear from you.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Marshall, it's been a year of calamity in healthcare and in the health of the country and other countries. I just like your kind of thoughts on a time in our lives when people have been thinking and talking more about health than ever before.
Well, it's interesting you would ask that question, Mick. For many years, we had a hard time getting our elected officials to pay much attention to healthcare. And certainly the pandemic has pushed those kind of issues to the forefront. But and I think if you think back about when Trump first got elected president, he tried to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, which we all know as Obamacare. And he was unsuccessful in doing that, as we all know. But that was really the first time that we had seriously taken any kind of healthcare issues seriously in this country for many years. What I like to say, the way I like to couch that is, every year we have a lot of tweaking around the edges to fix healthcare, but we've never really, in my view anyway, had any major kind of healthcare reform. Certainly the Affordable Care Act could be called some reform if you take the view that more government is helpful. But now with the pandemic and all the issues that are related to that, we now have an opportunity again to talk about healthcare. Unfortunately, most of the healthcare discussion will be around the pandemic and not around reforming the financing of healthcare or the delivery of healthcare services, which all need to be looked at very seriously, in my view.
Marshall, let me ask you about Integris. I know that you have been in the past board chairman at Integris. You're still on the board of Integris. How did you first get involved with the Integris system as a board member?
Well, that was 14 years ago. Ed Martin, who had been at that time, that was the former chair of the board and was involved in recruiting new board members, called one day and asked me if I would be interested in serving on the board, which I told him I didn't know that I was necessarily qualified to do that, but I'd be happy to talk to him about that. The need that Integris had at the time was the current audit committee chair was retiring from the board, and they needed somebody with a CPA background to come in and essentially run the audit committee. So that's how I first got involved.
How did Integris handle the last 12 months of what I'll call calamity around the healthcare industry as the state's largest healthcare provider, and being on that board? I mean, this must have been a tumultuous year.
Very much so, Mick. I think Integris took the lead in our community and in our state in assisting the governor in his rollout of his programs, certainly the vaccinations and treatment as well, providing beds, providing ICU beds, ventilators, and all those things that were used early on. But then later, when the vaccines became available, again, I think Integris stepped up and became the leader in our community in dealing with all of those issues. Certainly it put a stress on our organization, especially early on.
Financially, how have y'all coped and dealt with the fact that you just had so many people needing so much care?
Well, that's an interesting question. First of all, when the government shut down voluntary surgeries, non-necessary surgeries, some would call it, that gave us the capacity to handle those things. But certainly from an economic standpoint, from a financial standpoint, in the second quarter of this year, every hospital in the country experienced a decline in revenue, an increase in expense, and Integris was no exception to that. So since then, because of the government stimulus program and the CARES Act, some financial resources being made available by the federal government, I think most hospitals have been able to weather that storm. The ones that are still struggling are probably the same ones that were struggling before the pandemic.
I'm going to throw a name out to you and just ask you to respond. I'm not even going to ask you a question. Stanley Hupfeld.
Well, great Oklahoman. Stanley was the CEO at Integris when I first went on the board. I did not know Stanley well at that time. I got to know him very well after I went on the board, and even more so after he retired. I think, as you all know, you've had him as a guest before. He's written a book, Political Malpractice, and that book, written in 2012, really had a major impact on me because stepping back from my role as a board member, it caused me to look at more public policy healthcare related issues and not just the day-to-day operations of a hospital. Stanley had a big impact on me, and as you all know, he's still playing a major role in our community as chair of the Oklahoma Healthcare Authority, which is Oklahoma's Medicaid agency.
Well, one last thing before the break. I know that you have been involved in the Tobacco Endowment Settlement Trust, or Tobacco Settlement Endowment Trust, TSET. They have been a sponsor on this show. We've had Julie Bisbee on a number of times. Talk to us very briefly about your relationship with TSET and why it's important.
It's very important because it's preventive. Attorney General Mike Hunter asked me to go on the board a couple of years ago to find out what was really going on there as I got involved and understood not just TSET's constitutional priorities, but really the results of the wonderful things they do there. I've become very proud of the fact that I'm on that board. They do a lot of wonderful things.
Well, they've just celebrated their 20th anniversary, as I understand it. And yeah, they're a fine organization. Well, we'll probably let that be the last comment for this segment. We'll take a short break. You're watching The Verdict with Kent Meyers, Mick Cornett, and Marshall Snipes, and we'll be right back.
One of the best kept secrets about the post 9/11 GI Bill benefit is that it can be used at a trade school or a technical school, and it doesn't have to be used at a university or college. These are benefits that the veterans have earned through their service, and they should take advantage of it.
Veterans really need to understand that there are many resources offered by the Oklahoma Department of Veteran Affairs. They are there to help you find the right school for you, the school that will help you and your family make great steps into your future.
OU Law has a history and heritage that are unparalleled. At the University of Oklahoma College of Law, we empower our students to pursue the career of their dreams. We have the highest U.S. News ranking ever achieved by an Oklahoma law school. We are the first law school in the country to launch a college-wide digital initiative. And this year, our competition teams rank #2 in the nation. OU Law, generations of excellence, limitless possibilities.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Kent Meyers and Mick Cornett and our guest Marshall Snipes. You're watching The Verdict, and we're visiting with Marshall today about many things because he's had many activities and been a real leader in this community for a long time. Mick, where would you like to go?
Well, let's talk about politics for a second. You know, Marshall, you kind of grew up with the advent of the Republican Party in the state of Oklahoma and have been more active than a lot of business people through the years. Why has that been important to you?
Well, I think it was important to me because my first political campaign was, I was 16 years old. My dad was running a race of historic nature, the J.D. McCarty Vondel Smith race, if you know your Oklahoma political history. And I was a 16-year-old high school student, and I learned politics from the grassroots up. I became very interested in it. And probably what motivated me more than anything else was not just my dad, but it was all the people that were around him that helped him in those endeavors, and the passion they had for our country and our state and our government. And that just kind of bled over into my personality. And it's been something from a very early age that I've been highly interested in since.
You've occupied a number of positions in the Republican Party. I think you were a delegate to the National Convention a time or two.
Yes, sir, that's correct. In 1988, the George Bush, H.W. Bush convention.
How was that? What kind of experience was that, going to a national political convention?
Well, all of a sudden, a lot of people thought I was a lot more important than I thought I was, because all of the presidential candidates that were running that year, there were only a couple of thousand delegates, so it was easy for them to make the personal phone calls and reach out. Certainly their campaigns did. So it was a very busy time. Bush was, by the time we got to the convention, it was obvious Bush was going to be the nominee, but that wasn't necessarily always true during those campaign times. If you all remember, Pat Robertson was running, and our own Mark Nuttall ran that campaign, as you know. And early on, Pat Robertson was winning some of those early primaries, Iowa and so forth. And so that election was never really settled until later in the season. So that allowed a lot of those folks that were campaigning for president to reach out to those 2,000 people. So that's the genesis of my comment about somebody thought I was a lot more important than I thought I was.
Hey, Marshall, we're in our final segment with you here. I can't let you get out of here without talking about the healthcare issues that are going to be debated at the state capitol this year. A lot of big decisions. Some of them, if in anticipation, would be a whole new way of looking at delivering healthcare in the state of Oklahoma. What are your thoughts on what the legislature and the governor are facing?
Well, it's a monumental task they have to fund the Medicaid expansion that was passed by constitutional amendment in the last election. Governor Stitt, when he was elected, he asked me if I would chair his healthcare task force as part of the transition team. The work that we did on that task force was to come up with a blueprint for how healthcare ought to be handled from the state's perspective going forward. And as you know, that really means the Medicaid program, which we now have expanded, and now we've got to figure out a way to pay for it. Our recommendation back then was that if we are going to expand Medicaid, we need to take that opportunity to not just reform the Medicaid program, but also to figure out how we were going to pay for it, how to finance it. And even though our task force was not tasked with determining the financial piece of that, certainly we recommended that be addressed. Unfortunately, the legislature did not act, and so consequently, at least they didn't act in the way that the governor wanted them to act, or the way that we had recommended. And so that resulted in the proponents of Medicaid expansion being able to narrowly win that election last November to force the state to expand. So we've now expanded. Now, the Healthcare Authority, back to Stan Hupfeld's group, they had the opportunity then to figure out how to execute, and they put out an RFP, as you all know, to privatize, as some would call it, the Healthcare Authority duties. It's my understanding, I've not studied in depth, it's my understanding a lot of our recommendations from the policy group were included in the RFP that the Healthcare Authority put out. So there is some hope that we will get some reform out of this, assuming all of that happens and it gets funded properly. But with the financial pressures on the legislature this spring, I expect you're going to see a pretty bloody fight over what money is available.
Let me change the subject just a minute, if I may. I mentioned in the open that you were an author of 2 books, and you now have a blog, I guess is the proper term for it, coming out monthly or periodically, called Black Jet Theory. Can you tell us, first of all, how did you get the name for it, and what does that signify? And then tell us why you did it, why you're writing that.
Yeah, the name Black Jet Theory came from a little known fact that occurred during the Vietnam War, when a reporter who was covering the Vietnam War, was located in Cambodia, and the government had under Nixon had made the comments that we were not in Cambodia, we were not fighting a war there, and this reporter who was covering all of that kept seeing these black jets fly over. And the black jets were, as it turned out, were U.S. government military jets that were involved in bombing some of the Vietnam ammunition facilities there in Cambodia. So this reporter, just on the basis of common sense, watching black jets fly over, decided that he would write a story, and that broke. That was a huge story that that he broke out in the Vietnam War. So that was the genesis of the name. The reason that I started the blog, and the reason that and the purpose of it, is I became very frustrated in all my public policy work that nobody was really talking about the real issues. People were using sound bites, both sides. It doesn't matter which side of the argument you were on. People had reduced the public debate to sound bites, yelling and screaming on talk television at night, and it just became very frustrating. At the same time, I had a lot of elected officials and other people that were opinion leaders were asking me for my opinion about certain issues, and it just made sense to start a blog to answer some of those questions. So we did that. Fortunately, I had some time to be able to do that, because, as you guys know, it takes a lot of time to write and to publish. And fortunately, I've had enough time to do that in the past year.
Well, let me ask you this. How does one subscribe to your blog?
blackjettheory.com. Just send me an email and ask to be added.
blackjettheory.com.
Yes, sir.
Good. Well, I know that I'm sure a lot of our viewers will, as will I, formally subscribe. Finally, we just got about a minute left. You have been involved in many, many civic activities, and some of them you have graduated from because of time constraints and the like. But which are you working with now? What charitable organizations do you work with now? Got just about a minute.
Okay. The primary one that I'm still involved with is the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. That's an organization that I was involved in high school and have stayed close to those folks ever since. And that's still a big part of what I do from a civic, religious standpoint. And my other activities that I'm still involved in are all involved around church and church activities.
Chuck Bowman, wasn't he?
Yes, sir.
Instrumental in FCA?
Yes, in 1973, he did come back to Oklahoma and was the first executive director of FCA. We're on our second executive director now, John Odell. We've been very fortunate to have had 2 great leaders in that regard, and we're now in 90+% of all the high schools and most of all the colleges. So it's been a wonderful organization that had a lot of success.
Well, congratulations to you on all you've done. Mick and I really appreciate you giving our viewers your time this morning. Folks, we've been visiting with Marshall Snipes, the entrepreneur, accountant, medical care expert, and just generally good guy. Done a lot for Oklahoma. You've been watching The Verdict. Mick and I will be right back. Marshall, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
It used to be okay in hospitals. It used to be okay in movie theaters. It was okay in classrooms, restaurants, and airplanes. But thanks to a greater understanding of the dangers, that's not okay anymore. So now that we know secondhand smoke causes lifelong health problems, why is it still okay to smoke with children in the car? Bottom line, it's not okay. Let's get serious about protecting kids. Join the fight at stopswithme.com.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
You have children come from a different lifestyle, different mindset. You have to open your arms and really do what you have to do to have that child become a part of your family. And if it's more patience, that's what you do. Kids got to know they can trust you. And that's what we try to do with these kids.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Kent Meyers with Mick Cornett. We've just finished visiting with our guest, Marshall Snipes. I learned a lot, but just astounded at how well he's done everything he's attempted. Been very productive.
Again, you can sign up for his blog. He'll give you an email at blackjettheory.com. It's blackjettheory.com. And we've got a website, theverdict.tv. You can log on and tell us about a guest you'd like to see on a future edition. But we really thank Marshall for coming on the show today. And for Kent Meyers, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next week on another episode of The Verdict.